Thanks everyone for coming. I have a set of slides, so feel free again to ask questions in the Q&A, and we'll do more open conversation at the end of the session as well. But so what's going on in the mind of the Canadian consumer? It's been an interesting year. It continues to be an interesting year. I think this still holds true that consumer confidence drops pretty much every time the interest rates go up. So with every change from the Bank of Canada, anyone who's considering a major purchase, who's thinking maybe I want to buy that next vehicle, that large television, invest in real estate, they become more hesitant as the economy continues to be in its current state. I use this image. I've used it for a while this year to kind of say, I think the single hand face palm sums up the sentiment of the average Canadian. I know it's how I feel sometimes when I'm looking at my own bank account. Uh, excuse me, but I'm not the only person who thinks that this image is correct. The other people who thought this image was, really sums up the sentiment of the average consumer is the CBC. So when they published this article back in January, they said if you thought 2022 was bad, wait until you see what 2023 has in store for you. The year ain't over yet, so we'll see how this pans out as time goes on. But I know this continues to be a factor in the mind of the consumer. They're more hesitant to make that large purchase. Um, what's going on the auto shopping journey? Well, it's always evolving and shifting, and so we're always having to adjust to that as well. We know that the journey is digital, has been digital for quite a while, but anywhere upwards, this number kind of shifts maybe 1 to 0.5% every year. So some years it's 91, sometimes it's 90. In the past year, it's 89% of research for a vehicle happens online. So the bulk of the journey is digital. We know that within that, the top source used is search. That when we have questions, regardless of what they are, that where we go to, where we turn to get those questions answered is search. And so it's not surprising it remains the number one source used at 79%. And that certain phrases like cars to buy and others that are more auto retail specific, they continue to grow year over year. So as in the example of this one, 400% globally for phrases like cars to buy. Also, source number two, second most important source is online video, but it's not just that video is important, it's also that when I see that video, right, so at 66%, it's the second most important medium used. It's also a type of media that prompts people to action, right? So they see that video, it's impactful, it's a huge part of the journey. It's also part of an exercise in answering questions, seeing the inside of the vehicle, seeing it on the road virtually. But then it's like I watch that video and then I promptly jump over to a dealer website, book my test drive, look at locate a dealer feature on an OEM website, or maybe spend some time on that OEM website. So it's important as a source used. It's also an important driver of action in the journey. When I talk about video, and I'm often using this phrase, especially in reference to YouTube, no matter how big you think it is bigger, right? No matter how big in your mind you think YouTube is, it's bigger. And the clearest or most recent illustration I have for this is really Mr. Beast. You may or may not be familiar with Mr. Beast and his channels, but he is one of the top creators, not even the largest on the platform. And his subscriber count, when you take the collection of channels that he operates, his collection of subscribers is larger than Netflix and Disney Plus combined. And that's just, I would say it's one dude, but he now has a team of like 100 people that help him with the video production there. But when you try and wrap your head around that, that's just one channel. And here in Canada, there are over 30,000 creators who make a living on the platform. So the amount of content, the depth and breadth of content is really, even for us who work at Google and think about it every day, hard to wrap your head around. So no matter how big you think it is bigger. That being said, I think there's lots of opportunity in automotive, especially at tier three in the at the dealer level, for us to make better use of video. Let's talk a little bit about the dealership experience. Um, what are the factors that influenced which dealer I actually purchased from? Well, number one reason is actually you could get the vehicle or had it, right? So I know in the last couple of years, it may not have been on the lot. It might be more a factory ordering situation, but you had the specific vehicle that I was looking for or could get it. Number two, overall price. Number three, you're a reasonable distance from the consumer's home or from their work. And at number four, you had a decent purchase experience at this dealership previously. Often, when I ask a room of dealers how they would order these without actually showing the order or without giving the numbers, they think that's number one. They think previous purchase is the number one. But in in our data, and this has been repeated for a number of years, it's really that you had the vehicle and overall price are number one and number two. Looks like somebody's raised their hand. I don't know if they have a question. If you have a question, drop it into the Q&A feature that Kristen talked about earlier, and we can address it along the way. Do you see any possible inconveniences or disadvantages of purchasing from a dealership? Well, when we asked this question of the consumer, they had a lot to say. First, they said, yes, we don't like being sold things that we're not interested in, or we don't enjoy high pressure salespeople. We're confused about pricing and we're frustrated with the lack of pricing transparency, that they don't understand the inner workings of a dealership and why they have to deal with multiple people. So this handoff from salesperson to F&I person is jarring for the average consumer who's forgotten that they had to do that the last time they bought a car some 5, 6 years ago, or if they're a new Canadian and haven't experienced that previously. Too much time then spent waiting and too much time spent shopping or negotiating. So when I present this slide and these data points in a room full of dealers or OEMs, and I'm suggesting, if you want to make these things better, what are the things you should do? Really, it kind of boils down to find ways to save people time and just find ways to make it easier, right? I know we're not going to change things entirely at a dealership overnight, but just to focus on those two areas of what could we do that might make it easier, what could we do to save people time? Maybe those two things are in fact the same thing. Then we can improve the overall experience for the consumer. What happens though when they are frustrated? What happens when there are issues, as there have been with wait times and availability? Well, switch brands. So whether that is they switch entirely from OEM to OEM, or whether they switch within a brand and pick a different model at a different dealership, hard to say for sure. But that frustration leads people to a different purchase path. How are buyers responding to the current vehicle ecosystem? Well, I know inventory is coming back. There's still some constraints, or at least the throughput is much better than it has been in recent previous years. But in a world where consumer confidence is low, where the experience of the dealership is somewhat in question, and where there's other uncertainties, what are they doing? What is the reaction? Overall, the reaction is they're hanging on to their vehicle longer. So what we've seen is that up to 27% of people said, in this current climate, and this was actually earlier this year, late last year, Canadians indicated that they would delay buying a new vehicle as they waited for things to stabilize, whether that's inventory or their own financial situation or confidence concerns. And then at the same time, we're seeing these increase in queries year over year for maintenance related searches. So whether that's parts or service, it seems like there's a huge opportunity here while people are holding onto their vehicles longer for us to intercept and to provide service to them to keep that vehicle on the road longer. At the same time, one of the challenges to that is that the majority of people don't return to a new car dealership for service. Only 42% of folks said that they would actually go back to a branded car dealership for service. Instead of that, where are they going? They're going to the independent repair shops. They're going to dedicated service locations for oil change, for tire. They're going to tire retail store. Spoiler alert, that might be Canadian Tire, and other auto maintenance service chains. So other places other than a branded new car dealership. Of all the factors well, sorry, question here in the Q&A. Of all the factors influencing sales mentioned on the previous slide, did not see customer service sat or the way customer was made to feel listed. Things we've been hearing for years from customers, dealers being the most important. In a post-COVID world, has this significantly fallen off? Um, I think that, if you were to go back to that list of the four answers for why I picked the dealership, um, why I picked one dealership over another. A big chunk of that CSAT number rolls into that fourth bucket, like into that bucket around previous good experience. So the question is, are we somehow cooking the books a little bit? Like it's kind of and we recently did a piece of research here that hasn't been published yet, but I've seen some of the early work on it where um, we went end to end from website experience at the OEM down to actually secret shopping at dealership. And in one case, one OEM ended up with a near perfect score with the dealership experience. They, of course, picked the dealership that we would do the secret shopping on. So in a way, it kind of spoiled the results for that particular brand because they knew they were picking the dealer that was most likely going to deliver the best experience. So I think um, the question is different when it's being asked by either the OEM or by the dealer versus an independent third party is kind of one factor we probably need to look at. And the other would be a lot of that CSAT number probably rolls into that fourth bucket, into that previous good experience bucket. So, new piece of research that we did earlier this year on parts and service. We asked a bunch of questions about service and electric vehicles. One of the things I thought was most interesting and very surprising in that particular piece of research was that, too early to call this a trend, but I think useful information at this point in human history, that people are paying more for electric vehicle service versus non-electric vehicle service versus ICE service, almost to a factor of 3. So that the average service coming in around $750 versus $250 for regular vehicles. Again, first time we've ever done this particular research, first time we've seen this data, so there is no trend here yet. But I think it's interesting. And one of the often I will get asked why is this? What leads to this? I think it's fundamentally that the techs and the parts and the tires for electric vehicles are more expensive right now. That may or may not prove true longer term, but because I probably have to go back to my branded OEM, service center to get service for this new electric vehicle, and because the tires and the parts for that vehicle are probably more expensive, and the techs have been trained differently and probably built differently, that all lends itself to an overall higher ticket price for the electric vehicle service. And at the same time, most dealerships aren't advertising their service, so there's probably again an opportunity there if people are hanging on to their vehicles longer. Also, we asked, where do people source parts if they're buying parts themselves? So of the 26% of Canadians that bought parts online, where did they buy them from? Number one, they went to Amazon. After that, it's Costco, Canadian Tire, Kijiji, and eBay. Um, I make a pretty bold statement here, and that's really that if we don't want to lose our parts business, we probably need to be selling parts online to compete. And at the same time, most dealerships don't sell parts online. Most OEMs don't offer part sales online. So there's a huge opportunity here. And right now it's going to existing and traditional retailers or e-com operators. And if we want to hang on to this business, we're probably going to have to dip our toe into selling parts online. But really, when it comes down to if we were only going to talk about one thing, if we were only going to launch one campaign to really promote service, this is really about tires. And so like every year here, it snows at some point in the fall or winter, and we all panic and we all try to book that service appointment to get our winter tires put on. Spring is a little different, it gets stretched out. So some of us are more on the ball than others in terms of booking the summarization service to get those summer tires put on. But I think the point of this slide is really to illustrate that although there are these huge spikes at two different times of the year where tires really dominate the conversation in parts and service, actually at any time of year it's the most searched type of service or part. So that the opportunity here is really to be able to talk about tires if you're going to talk about anything in parts and service. Anonymous question here: do you see media spend increase on after sales search on other Google channels? um, do you see media spend increase on after sales? So has it increased? Um, I don't think it's increased materially. I think there's still a huge white space. I know that there are some dealers that are now dipping their toe into part sales. I know that because of this trend, some OEMs, whether that's tier two or through co-op, are looking to sponsor parts and service campaigns maybe more than they were previously. But I also think that's very different brand to brand, OEM to OEM, and region to region. So I think there's a beginning of a trend that more dealers are beginning this exercise of selling parts online, but I wouldn't say it's materially shifted overall media spend for after sales. Final thoughts. So taking all of those things into consideration, if you're going to take anything away from my part of this presentation and everything I've said so far, what would I tell someone to do? What would I say? What would I say these days? Number one, I would say, I think we got the word out about search. I think at pretty much every tier one, two, and three, although there's still more work to do and we like to change stuff all of the time, um, I think the real opportunity, especially for tier three, is video. It is the second most used source of information, and it is a type of media that drives to action and drives those actions back to dealership. So there's probably an opportunity for us to be doing more cross tier on video. I think if we want to address those concerns, if we want to actually turn some of those numbers around and address people's concerns about the buying journey, I think it's as simple as we need to find ways to make it easier, whatever those are. I'm not going to be overly prescriptive. I have ideas. If you ever want to buy me a beer and I can talk about it later, I'm happy to have that conversation. But really, it's, save people time, make it easier, and that will improve some of those numbers. And then last, I would say there's white space here in parts and service that simply by letting people know that you offer it, we make the assumption that they do. I don't think they do. And on the parts side, the real risk is over time we lose this business, that the business goes to other retailers, other types of businesses. So those are my things I say. Those are my things I say. Um, Having said all of the things I say, I want to thank everyone from Cartelux for including me in this presentation. They are a great partner of ours. They've done some amazing work in the other parts of the world where they've been in operation for much longer and have produced some pretty great case studies in those markets. So I will, at this point, turn it over to Matthew number two, and he will carry the torch from here.